being live streamed and will be recorded for archive purposes. Can I also ask all the members who wish to speak and officers, could you please raise your hand and the chair will call you in at the appropriate time? And just an extra reminder that under the Local Government and Elections Act 21, anyone who's wishing to speak must also be seen on camera. Thank you very much. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Karen. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see so many of you this morning. So if we move to our agenda this morning, have we got any apologies for absence? I know we've had, I think Councillor Good has been in touch.
That's correct, Chair. That's the only apologies I've had at the moment is Councillor Good from Bridgend. Thank you.
And so do we have any others from?
No, my understanding is we've got the representative from Cardiff, 2 representatives from Cardiff, and obviously 2 representatives from the Vale, so we can commence the meeting.
Great, thank you, Karen. So item 2 on the agenda are the minutes of the meeting that if you recall, we've had 2 meetings previously. We had our normal meeting on the 13th of December last year, but we also had our special meeting around the budget. So if we take agenda item 2, part 1, which is the minutes of the 13th of December, can we all agree that they're a true representation of that meeting?
Yes.
And move there.
And seconded by Pam?
Yeah.
Thank you. And for the special meeting on the 9th of February, can I have somebody to move that?
I'll move that.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. So we move to item 3. Are there any declarations of interest? No, and Karen, you haven't had anything, have you?
No, Chair, I haven't, but I would like to point out for members' benefit that going forward from the monitoring officer's point of view, we have now added whenever a councillor member makes a declaration, they must also be reminded to make a declaration of the nature of that interest. I know we haven't got none today, but the agenda has slightly changed going forward to reflect that.
Okay, brilliant.
For all council meetings, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Karen. And thanks for reminding us. Okay, so let's move to the substantive part of the meeting now. So we've got 3 reports today. The first report is the overview and update report, which Helen's going to lead on. And that follows its normal format, as you'll see, going through our services and updates on various issues there. So can I hand over to you, Helen? I can't see you, Helen, but
here I am. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, brilliant.
And,
hello.
And morning to everyone. I have to apologise that I'm working at home today and the dogs are off on one. So I'll just get that disclaimer in first of all. So yes, the overview and update report for this meeting, it takes a familiar format to what we've seen previously. So I'm going to begin by taking you through a little bit of human resources aspects to the service. And as usual, we reflect on our sickness absence, and it is elevated, unfortunately, for Q3 compared with Q3 in previous years, which you'll see in 2.1 in the report. Again, unfortunately, we've got a number of members of staff who are on long-term sickness absence, and as you'll see from the table, a significant element of the Q3 sickness absence is related to long-term sickness, and those are being managed through the HR process currently. Short-term sickness is also a little elevated for Q3 compared to what we've been used to in previous years, and there's no particular reason for that other than what we mentioned in the December meeting, and that's the change to the reporting mechanism for cases of COVID. And of course, a winter quarter as well, we were looking at quite a high incidence of flu in that period. So moving on to 2.2, and it's just a very brief update for you following all the budget discussions that we had in December, and of course then in the extraordinary meeting in February. And it's to confirm that arrangements are now in place to achieve the 3% saving that was agreed. And to that end, 3 vacant posts are being deleted, and they come from each one in each of the 3 sectors of the service. Clearly, we need to keep an eye on staff wellbeing as a result of that. And while, as I say, they are vacant posts, it does mean that resources in some of our teams are going to be less as a result of taking out those vacant posts. And work begins to identify and exploit the additional areas of income generation that we will bring forward going into the new financial year. And the final part of the HR update is a nice story at 2.3, and hopefully you've had a chance to read that. We've got a number of colleagues this year who are reaching the 40-year continuous service milestone. And remarkably, 2 of those members of SRS staff started actually with Cardiff Council on the same day in January of 1983, and they're still working together, which I think is a great news story. Combined service of 80 years, which is incredible. So we're doing a piece on StaffNet, which is for Vale of Glamorgan intranet on those 2 members of staff. And as I say, it is a really nice news story, and some more 40-year milestones to follow later in this calendar year too. So I'm not sure, Chair, if there are any questions on that HR part before we move on.
I think Councillor Lewis has a question, but before I go to Councillor Lewis, on that last item, Helen, on the 40-year service, it might be nice if we could send, because obviously if it's on, it'll go on our staff intranet. But if it could go, if we could send it to councillors here from the meeting, just to give them a view of what we're circulating. I think that would be good.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We'll do that.
Brilliant. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you. So I'm having trouble with my mic then. Good morning, everybody. Helen, I was just wondering, the levels of sickness pre-COVID, were they at the same sort of levels, or is it since COVID they've gone up a lot?
During COVID, Councillor Lewis, we saw this sort of dip in the level of sickness absence. And I think we were sort of riding on a bit of a crest of a wave as a result of that period of lockdowns, etc. It clearly, as you've seen, has picked up. I think, if memory serves me right, we're probably a little bit more elevated now in terms of sickness absence, number of days per FTE, than we were pre-COVID, but I would have to check the exact figures on that. But we're certainly moving back in that direction, and probably a little bit beyond where we were in terms of absence.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that. I just wondered whether there was a significant difference post-COVID. So right. Thanks for that. Thank you.
If they're not,
thank you, Councillor Lewis. I don't see any other hands. Thanks for that, Helen. I think we can go on.
Lovely, thanks, Chair. 2.4. Just a mention here of the financial position for Q3. This will now be dealt with as a standalone paper, which Gemma is here to present for us in the next agenda item. So I won't dwell on 2.4, other than to mention that will be coming in the next report presented to the Joint Committee. And then moving down to 2.5, we're moving to performance monitoring. And again, familiar, we'll take a look at the performance tables shortly, but I just wanted to give a little bit of context, moving down through 2.6. And again, members will be really familiar with this diagram, this figure 1 that I've put in for the last few overview and update reports. And this is looking at the FSA COVID-19 Local Authority Recovery Plan. So members will be aware that we've been following this right the way through the last 18 months or so. And the focus to the end of December has been on the less than broadly compliant derated premises. So that will be reflected when we look at the actual performance shortly. But I just wanted to flag the fact that we've had correspondence in the last 10 days or so from the FSA, Food Standards Agency, and they've announced that the recovery plan will not continue beyond the end of March. So from April 1st, local authorities will work towards, I'll get the wording right, realignment or realigning with the provisions of the Food Law Code of Practice. So this is a resumption of the full food programme for both food standards and food hygiene. So last week, we met with the Food Standards Agency, with officials there, to understand exactly what that will look like for shared regulatory services. And members will be very familiar with the fact that we've got some unique challenges to meet the demands of our really diverse and vibrant food scene. Turnover of businesses, as we know, is a big issue. At frequent churn and keeping on top of that, the whole breadth of the food programme, as I say, presents some unique challenges. But we've met with the FSA and we have agreed with them a risk-based approach so that we can make that move from the recovery plan to the next chapter, really, in recovery. So on that point, Chair, if I may, I'm going to pass to Christina, who will take us through the first part of Appendix 1, which is where the performance information is. And we're hoping that Jason is able to share his screen so that we can actually look at the different entries.
Thanks, Helen.
Thanks, Christine.
And morning, everyone. Hi, and thanks to Jason for sharing the screen. So this is nothing new. We do this every quarter. You're all very much in the know as to how we do this. So first of all, we update you on the high risk food inspections, and we are focusing here on category A and B rated premises. So as you can see, both Bridgend and the Vale were green, and the reason that Cardiff were amber was that one premise was actually missed as part of the inspection programme, which resulted tipping us into the amber colour. That has been done now, and all very much on target. So obviously we're approaching the end of the financial year now, so we're very much on target for end of Q4. And at the moment, everything is very much on target for hitting all A's and B's for Q4 also. So I'm just going to move on now to the next performance indicator, which is category C rated premises. Now, of course, we need to factor in that we're following the recovery plan as it stands. So that infographic that we've been putting in front of you for the last year, we got up to speed and hit all milestones up until the broadly compliant Cs. And after that point, we met with the FSA to discuss a risk-based approach going forward. And the agreement until the end of this financial year was that all A's and B's would be completed, and also all up to 3-star rated Cs. So it's not surprising that this, of course, is a red performance indicator for us, because, of course, the quantity and quantum of backlog inspections for SRS will of course be higher than most local authorities because of our size and scale.
Christine, just remind us what kind of businesses we're talking about in kind of category C.
Okay, so effectively, category C rated premises could range from sort of restaurants, takeaways, etc. But they are all ones that have previously been risk assessed to deem them to be a category C rated premise. Okay, so they're not falling in the higher risk of category A's and B's. However, it is they're not classed as sort of low risk premises requiring sort of a D or E rated premise. So still very much in need of inspection, and of course we will get there. Of course, if we receive complaints in relation to these premises, an inspection will also be done, and a need for us to go out. So we're working hard in terms of recruiting some contractors as well to help us with the backlog. But of course, we're trying to do this very much stage risk-based approach in order to tackle this, to make sure of the Cs, we're still targeting the higher risk Cs then rather than the lower risk. So for example, we wouldn't want to be going to 5-star rated Cs over 3-star rated Cs. No. So hence this hierarchy of inspection that we're undertaking. So we'll move on to the next slide, Jason. And again, these are the new businesses. And of course, because the focus has very much been on the A's and B's and the 3-star rated C's, in terms of the new businesses that we get in, what we try and do is make an assessment based on what they're telling us that they're doing and the practices that they are undertaking at those premises. And again, doing a very much risk-based approach as to the higher risk new businesses that we're targeting in the first instance. And on to the next page. And these are our broadly compliant figures. So again, this is very much what we find out on inspection. So it's not a measure of us necessarily, it's more the standards at the businesses. Now, we are seeing a lot more enforcement action being needed, and that is very much predicated on businesses that haven't been inspected in some time. But we are working with business as much as possible to increase standards. But of course, once we move into sort of enforcement action territory, that of course is timely for officers, and that does take them away from the normal day-to-day inspection regime, which again has an impact on the performance that you see in front of you.
Sorry, Christine, can I ask you another quick question?
Sure.
I do apologise, just because.
No, it's fine.
So so just generally, I realised, for quite proper reasons that the backlog. Do you think, with the cost of living, that there's been an increase in perhaps premises not following all the rules and trying to cut corners? Is that something you can assess at this stage or not?
Yeah, definitely.
I know that's something we talked about before, wasn't it? That there was a worry that going forward that might be an issue.
Yeah, that's right. We're certainly seeing, Councillor, that it is having an impact. For example, we've had several cases of premises where we've closed premises for not having adequate hot water supply, and that has been a result of the energy companies switching off their access to gas and boilers, etc., because of lack of payment. So we are certainly seeing that there are those kind of aspects which have an impact in terms of the compliance that we're seeing. And of course, with sort of less people going out to eat, the market is very competitive, and things are getting much harder for food businesses to make sure that they are compliant. It's our role to make sure that we're working with them, doing everything that we possibly can to encourage compliance. But of course, that said, there is a minimum standard that we expect of our food businesses. And of course, our role is to act swiftly and quickly to ensure that we deal with those premises who aren't providing that level of service that we would expect. So, initially we discussed at previous joint committees that we were worried about sort of food businesses turning off fridges. That was an example that we gave. Yeah. We're not seeing that level of non-compliance, but we are certainly seeing the sort of lack of hot water supply, and that's because of lack of payment to the energy companies. So something really for us to monitor closely. But of course, times are tough for businesses, and we need to be making sure that we're supporting them as much as we can.
Because that I mean, in terms of sort of feeding into sort of policy in Welsh Government as well. That would be quite interestingly statistically to have that kind of information if we can actually say this is due to, inflation or high prices and people not being able to pay their bills. That would just be quite useful statistically. That's really, but thank you, sorry.
No, absolutely. And our sort of update meeting that we had with the Food Standards Agency last year, we shared some of our experiences for that to be fed in. But absolutely agree, Councillor, that these are all valid stats that we need to be feeding into. As the biggest food service in Wales, we are seeing that more than most local authorities.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Christine. Sorry, go on.
No problem. Okay, and moving on to trading standards. So in front of you, we've got our high risk trading standards inspections and all green there, nothing to be concerned about. And moving on to the next page, this is our new businesses for trading standards. You will see some reds here, and there is a direct correlation here between some of the food hygiene new businesses, in that our food hygiene colleagues undertake some food standards work at the same time as their food hygiene inspections, and therefore, as their new business target performance is showing as red, that has a direct impact also on the trading standards new businesses also. So we're hoping that will correct itself as time goes on and we get through that backlog, but just to provide a little bit of an explanation in terms of that red that you're seeing in front of you. And that is it from my update in terms of food and trading standards. Happy obviously to take any questions or add any more information should you have any queries.
Thank you, Christine. I think Councillor Diath has a question.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Hope you're well. Thank you for your presentation. Just a quick question around environmental health, if that's all right. And it's on the back of the case of Lilo's Grill in Cardiff, which the service was heavily involved in over a number of years, because that's going to hit the press, I think, in a few days' time. And I was genuinely shocked by it. I was shocked by the appalling conditions of the restaurant. I was shocked by the way they were given chance after chance after chance to improve things. And in the end, they got quite a hefty fine. But do you feel we have adequate tools to punish people who persistently don't follow the rules, who persistently endanger the public? Because really looking at all the quite grim and grisly stuff that went on there, you can't help but thinking, well, you should be banned from running a restaurant.
Hi, Councillor Diath. Yeah, and that case is actually being sentenced this week. It was due to be sentenced last week, but the court did ask for an adjournment. So we're awaiting sentencing on that one on Thursday. So that has been an incredibly lengthy court case, not helped by a number of factors. Of course, the court proceedings are delayed because of COVID, etc. And that, you're right, what was absolutely lengthy in nature, in that there were several judicial reviews and lots of back and forth in terms of court process. So they don't normally take it as long as that, and that is unique in nature. In terms of sort of the standards at the premises, yes, absolutely, very, very poor. And of course, the way in which we deal with food businesses really depends on what we see in front of us, and of course history of compliance, for example. So first of all, our role is to ensure that the findings that we find on inspection, where they are that bad, we sort of stop that premise from trading to ensure standards are improved before we can open again. So where we identify an imminent risk, that's where we put a stop to it there and then. However, once businesses are up to a certain standard, it is our role then to ensure we get the compliance that we need to help that business trade again. Some businesses will, of course, learn from mistakes and act quickly. Others do require more support and more sort of enforcement measures, to make that happen. There is an option in terms of those very bad food businesses. Once we go through to the court proceedings and on sentence, we can apply for something called a prohibition order, where we can ask the court to consider stopping that person effectively running a food business in the future. And that application has been made in accordance with this case as well.
Oh, right, good.
Yeah, so there are enforcement tools there for us. It is a long, lengthy, arduous process to get through the court system. And of course, as I said, this one has been quite complicated in nature. But it just goes to show, Councillor, that, you know, it's only the very, very bad cases that get through to that sort of enforcement court action, where we get ones who have sort of just clearly made some mistakes. We try and work with them to help improve and educate as best as possible. However, for those ones where standards are that poor, it really is our role to take them through the court process and make sure that we put before the court and try and get sentences as best we can. So yes, it's been a really really hard, long process on that one, and we're obviously keen for sentence to take place on Thursday and hopefully get the right outcome as a result of that.
Okay, thanks. But just talking purely in general terms, do you feel you have the tools to enforce as adequately as you like, or would you like more tougher powers?
We'd always like more, Councillor. You know, I would say that the tools are there. However, it is such a long process to go through to get to that means. You know, there are other non-compliance that what we dealt with, and the tools have been there, and we've managed to gain compliance very quickly. But of course, this one I would say is quite unique in nature, and has been a very difficult one to deal with.
So it's the length of time it all takes, rather than not having the right. Cool. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Diath, and thank you, Christine.
Thanks, Chair. I think that's the end of my update, and I think it's over to Will now for his performance reporting.
Brilliant, thank you. Over to you, Will.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, happy to report a very positive picture from the noise and air pollution teams and the licensing teams, in the sense that all the targets have been exceeded. I think it is worthwhile mentioning the officers in the noise and air pollution team. It's across the service. I think for the first time in several years, we now have a full complement of staff, which obviously assists. And coming into the third quarter, and a very busy quarter too, because of the seasonal nature of complaints that the teams receive. So yeah, the first one you have in front of you is the response times for noise and air, domestic noise and air complaints within 3 days. So that's been achieved in over 90% of cases. And if you move down, Jason, the next two reflect some of our commercial and industrial noise and air complaints, where we put a slightly more challenging target, a very challenging target actually, of 1 working day, because that is in there basically to reflect the fact that they can sometimes affect larger numbers of people if it's an industrial or commercial source. And again, we've met that and exceeded that target of 75%. And the last one for the noise and air team is primarily dealing with alarm complaints, which is some of them are dealt with outside normal working hours, some side within hours, but they can have a detrimental effect on amenity when they're sounding continuously. So that's a positive picture. And then our licensing teams, despite us having a bit of a shortfall in staffing in some of the areas, have processed those in accordance with the legislation. And again, there's a 100% compliance with the targets that are set there. So certainly within my area, very, very pleased to report that back to committee and bask in the glory, reflective glory of the officers. So well done to them. Thanks.
Well done to your team, and do pass on our well dones from here as well, Will. Can I just ask you a quick one on licensing? Yeah. So are the issues around licensing sort of variation? So where applicants are making an application to vary the licenses, or
It could be a whole host of issues. It could be new application, grants of application, applications for licenses. So there's a range of different applications that will be made to the team. Yeah, so it does vary.
Vary. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Are there any questions for Will? Yeah, well done, Will, to the team. Brilliant.
Thank you.
So is it who's next on? Is it back to you, Helen?
Back to me, Chair. Yes, thank you. So if I can pick up 2.8 in the report. So this is where we start to talk about the service updates and the different areas of work that have been ongoing. And in 2.8, I just wanted to flag the fact that recently Welsh Government has completed and reported on a review of the health protection system in Wales, and looking at ways in which that can be further strengthened after the very much the success of the partnership working throughout COVID and beyond. And it's sort of against that backdrop that there's now plans to build on the success of that approach of the partner agencies through COVID and beyond. And the report recognises the huge importance and significance of the local authority role. So we've been working with the health boards to discuss exactly what that will look like, so that we're able to continue to provide the services that we have of late. So that is around supporting those high risk settings, the care homes, etc., with COVID. But it will be more than that in terms of our contribution to that wider health protection agenda. So we're waiting for confirmation on some funding so that we can take that forward in the coming financial year, and we'll be able to update members further on that, probably now in the June meeting. So just to flag that with everyone. And then moving down to 2.11, Chair, you'll notice that this is some familiar text. I've taken this out of the December report, and if you recall, we had hoped that we could give some thought and some time to special procedures, which is a big item for us going into the new financial year and the following financial year. So I've replicated the text. I'm not going to dwell on that because we have with us Sarah Swaysland, who's one of our SRS team managers for communicable disease and health and safety. So Sarah's prepared a presentation, and she'll be able to talk us through special procedures and the new Welsh Government regulatory regime for special procedures.
Great, thank you, Helen, and thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Sarah, for being patient, because we did put back your presentation originally. So thank you very much.
Oh, that's no problem at all. Thank you ever so much for asking me to do this today. I'm conscious that maybe not everybody is fully aware of what the situation is with special procedures. So I've taken it from the perspective of looking at where we are currently, what the current work streams are that Welsh Government's looking at, but also an opportunity for us to look at what the challenges and the opportunities will be for SRS moving forward. So if it's okay, I'll just come off camera to share my screen, and hopefully that'll go smooth.
You're on mute, Sarah.
Sorry, press the wrong button. That's not a good start. There are a few photographs in this which may be a little bit squeamish for some people. So just to warn you.
That's what everyone's looking forward to, Sarah.
Okay, so if I just start the slideshow. Right, can you see that okay? Is that sharing?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, fabulous. Yeah. Okay. So what are special procedures? So from the context of where we are now, it's your traditional tattooing, it's cosmetic skin piercing, which you can see the full range probably on that individual's face in that particular photograph. It also includes semi-permanent tattooing, so that would be your lip blush, microblading of the eyebrows and also eyeliner. It would include electrolysis, which is hair removal process, acupuncture and dry needling, and also the more traditional ear piercing. Now, what Welsh Government is looking to do in the initial phases of the new regulatory regime is to uplift what we currently legislate for. And part 2 will then look at some of the newer treatments that are common on now, such as your aesthetics, Botox, fillers, vampire facials, and some of the more extreme body modifications. So why should we be concerned about special procedures? Well, I think this kind of says it all, really. This is a tattoo that went very badly wrong and was subject to a Pseudomonas infection. And something like this can leave permanent scarring and require a significant amount of medical intervention to treat it. So what can go wrong? A whole heap of things. So you've got your bacteriological infections, such as Streptococcus, which I suppose has hit the media quite heavily recently with the eye gas and scarlet fever upsurging cases. You've got Pseudomonas, which can cause things like folliculitis, particularly loves moist conditions in the groin and armpit area, and those parts of the body where you're likely to get some of the more extreme body piercings. You can also have Staphylococcus infection, which in its worst case scenario can cause sepsis and death. You've also got some of the bloodborne viruses, such as your hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and HIV. But as well as those, you've got some of the lesser known complications, so allergic reactions, and that may be to some of the pigments. It could be to the metals if they're poor quality. We can also have something called keloid scarring, and the eyebrow picture there at the top, that's just illustrating the significant scarring that you can have where a procedure is done very badly, and it does require significant laser treatment to remove it. So this is what going wrong looks like. So you can see there could be inflammation, which is indicative of could be the beginning of sepsis. You've got pus-like boils starting, which is a Staphylococcus infection. You've got swelling. You've got quite significant damage to bits of the body that have been pierced or tattooed. So it's a visible outcome that can go very badly wrong where it's done poorly. So the current legal controls are the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act, and that's from 1982. So as you can appreciate, it's a piece of legislation that hasn't really kept pace with the aesthetics industry. Now, this is a one-off registration where you'd register the premises and the practitioner, and that would be with the local authority where that business is located. That means it's a one-hit for registration. You may never see that business again unless you have a complaint or you need to register somebody new who starts to practice at that particular business. It's also caused quite a significant variation in standards that are being employed across Wales as a whole. Not every local authority adopted the model bylaws, and certainly within SRS itself, whilst Cardiff and the Vale adopted the model bylaws back in 2003, Bridgend didn't. So you've got that slight variation even within our region itself. It only includes the procedures that I've just mentioned and doesn't enable any other treatments to form part of that regulatory regime. And that's what the new special procedures licensing system is hoping to overcome. Under the current scheme, the only recourse for non-compliance is prosecution. So there isn't anything that you can use with regards to temporary stopping of a procedure, temporary closure of a premises, or even an improvement notice. You would have to rely on health and safety legislation to do that. And if it's the type of premises which doesn't fall to the local authority for health and safety enforcement, and certainly scratchers or illegal tattooists working in domestic premises would fall under that, it can be exceptionally challenging to try and curtail the procedures that these illegal practitioners are carrying out. The other complicating factor is registration is currently only done for those piercing activities which are done as part of a business undertaking. So you may have somebody who goes around illegally tattooing somebody or doing it very badly, but they may argue that we're not taking money for it, so it's not in the course of a business. So the only other legislative regime we have to our benefit at the moment, Part 5 of the Public Health Wales Act is already in force, and that makes it an offence to pierce or arrange an appointment to pierce an intimate area on somebody under the age of 18. We also have the Tattooing of Minors Act from 1969, which is co-regulated between local authorities and the police. And that's an offence to tattoo anybody under the age of 18 unless for medical reasons. Now, I have historically prosecuted somebody under that where a minor was tattooed, but it's not probably the mainstay of what we have to deal with. So what's the new legal framework? Now, when this legal framework is likely to come into being has been a movable feast. It certainly was supposed to have come into play a couple of years ago. It was most recently touted to be the 1st of January 2024, but now looks as if it's going to be the 1st of April 2024. So a special procedure under Part 4 of the Public Health Wales Act will include the treatments that I've already talked about. The requirements of the Act will also be supported by regulations and non-statutory guidance, and it's those regulations that can be amended to include those wider treatments that we know are potentially problematic out there. Now, unfortunately, the regulations and the statutory guidance have yet to be written, so we have no context as to what's going to be included in that. But certainly there's a push for Botox fillers and microneedling to be included within that body of legislation. Now, under the new scheme, practitioners will be personally licensed to perform the special treatments, and that licence will be for a 3-year period, or if it's for a temporary event or an exhibit, it'll be on a 7-day basis. So that will give us that renewable 3-year revenue coming in from a licensing perspective. The premises where the have to be approved, and again those approvals will last for a 3-year period, and for exhibits and temporary events that will be 7 days. Now that's a new addition from what we currently have under the registration scheme, where temporary events and exhibitions are actually excluded from the registration scheme. There will be licensing criteria that will have to be determined, and that will include infection prevention and control training and first aid training that will have to be completed by the practitioner. There will be a standard of competence that has to be achieved. The premises will have to meet a certain baseline level of standards, and the licence conditions will prescribe what they look like. The same will be true for equipment conditions. There will be a process of age verification. So at the moment, they're looking to push for pretty much everything to be 18 or over, and also looking at a minimum age for the people delivering those procedures as well. So at the moment, you may have somebody working for the likes of Claire's Accessories who may be under 18, who would be doing ear piercing. So at the moment, they're looking at whether there's a need to have a baseline level of 18 as a practitioner for everything. There will also be a requirement to have quite rigorous consultation arrangements with your client and robust record keeping as well. Now, the local authority will have a duty to maintain a register of all licensed practitioners and approved premises, and there will be a preset local authority fee structure that will be set across Wales. So again, this is in the throes of being determined, and it's being led by somebody in licensing and Caerphilly Council. And at the moment, they're looking at setting a high, medium and low threshold so that local authorities can base their fees around that. At the moment, it looks like it could be as much as about £580 for a licence fee. For the licences and the approvals, they will be issued, we'll be able to revoke them, there will be a voluntary termination arrangement and the provision for varying them as well. And obviously all of those will be subject to separate fees. Now, the Welsh Government's ongoing work streams. So currently they're consulting on phase 1, and that is ongoing until the 19th of April. So this consultation process is looking at the personal licence and premises approval conditions. It's been thrown open to local authorities and industry to consult on. And as part of SRS's support of Welsh Government to get as much consultation as possible, Christina and I are holding a workshop tomorrow with Welsh Government representation, which industry has been invited to. There's preparation and translation of data protection impact assessments and regulatory impact assessments. And I'm also supporting Welsh Government by attending the fortnightly task and finish groups, which is really there to develop the regulations and the conditions and to provide some steer onto what the non-statutory guidance will look like. It's quite challenging, it's quite fluid. There are lots of discussions, possibly about some things that I would have assumed would have been bottomed out by now, but it is good to not all agree all of the time, and I think that will make for better quality legislation coming out the other end. Welsh Government's also regularly engaging with 6 registered training centres that have been approved by the Royal Society of Public Health for the delivery of the Level 2 Infection Prevention and Control training course. And obviously SRS is one of those training centres, and they are represented there by the industry and enterprise arm of the service. Welsh Government's also engaging with all Wales licensing expert panels to agree the fee structure for the new special procedures legislative framework. It has agreed the funding for the All Wales National Register, and that is going to be hosted by Monmouthshire County Council. So initially there was huge concern that local authorities would independently have quite significant resource burdens and financial costs to develop their own licence database. So the decision was to write the legislation in such a way that you could have an all Wales licensing system, very akin to Rent Smart Wales. That is currently being built. So at the moment, we're not quite sure what data fields are going to be included in that and what the overall final product is going to look like. There's also quite regular engagement with Environmental Health Wales, DPPW and the other expert panels that would have implications with this area of work. So consultation process 2 is going to start in autumn 23, and that's going to look at the devil of the detail for the regulations that support the Act. And there's also going to be a need to develop supporting regulations with notice templates and visit form templates just to ensure continuity and consistency across all of Wales. So I'd like to quickly look at the challenges and opportunities for SRS as part of this piece of work, which is going to be a massive change for the whole service area, to be honest. So in green, I've put the delivery of the Level 2 award in infection control and prevention for special procedures. So we're already an approved training centre. We have delivered a number of courses already, and it does give us scope for potential revenue generation. It's something that will be required, certainly within the next year and thereafter, because we will always have that natural turnover of practitioners who will need to do the course prior to their personal licence submission. But there's also scope for us to require people who've already completed it to redo it if we feel their practices have deteriorated to the extent that their knowledge could be called into question. Now, from an AMBER perspective, there are a number of approved training providers out there, and some of those are looking and able to deliver it in an e-learning format. So I think that is something that SRS is going to need to look at, just to get a wider audience as possible and to deliver it in the most efficient and effective way that we possibly can. Into AMBER as well, I've also put but the ability to meet the demand from practitioners across the SRS region and other local authority areas. So there's not great coverage of training in South East Wales at the moment. So we do know, and we have experienced, that practitioners from neighbouring local authorities will be looking to use our SRS training courses if there's no provision within their own particular local authority area. Now, into RED, the implementation of this new legislative framework, once it goes live, does not come with any additional funding for local authorities. It's going to be a huge piece of work. We've got a significant number of premises and practitioners across SRS. There's going to be no grandfather rights with this particular legislative scheme. So all of those who are currently registered will have to go through a brand new visit process to ensure that they are compliant with the licensing scheme as and when it goes live. So that will give us a very packed period of time where we'll have to try and get through all of those as quickly as we possibly can, just so that we're not stopping their ability to trade. And at the moment, the transition period from Welsh Government is still to be agreed. We're pushing for 12 months to give us that breathing space, but it's not set in stone yet. It's also unclear if the current licensing databases will be compatible with the prerequisite data fields that will be on the National Register. So what they're looking at having is a system, I suppose, a bit like the Food Standards Agency with the uploads of the ratings, where probably once a month, each licensing authority will have to upload all of their information to the new National Register so that the general public will be able to have a look at an accurate public-facing database so they can check on any business that they want to prior to having a special treatment done. Now, as we know, we've got quite a variation in databases for licensing for this purpose across SRS. So that could mean that we're going to have quite a need to focus on ensuring they are compatible. And even if they can't be updated, how we achieve that so that we're able to smoothly populate the National Register as and when it goes live. I've also put into RED the licensing administrative process is going to be more onerous than what we currently have for the registration scheme that we work now, as well as having a lot more paperwork coming in. So you'll have the standard form with the photograph, etc. But there's also going to be a need to have a basic DBS check done. There's also going to be need to provide evidence of the infection control training. And at the moment, there's possibly the requirement to submit responses on how they plan to run their business, almost like a Q&A format. Again, that has yet to be determined. And if it is going to be put in place, what that looks like hasn't been confirmed yet either. But it will need additional training for the licensing team so that they're comfortable that they can interpret what information they're going to be receiving. This scheme will also be subject to appeal to licensing committee. So once the initial tranche of training has been provided by Welsh Government, it will then fall to the local authority to ensure that any changes of membership of that licensing committee do have the requisite training to be able to discharge that function. So some additional challenges and opportunities. It does open up the scope of the licensing framework of who it will apply to. It will make it a more effective enforcement tool for scratchers. So it will be an all-encompassing piece of legislation. So anybody who's delivering a special procedures treatment at home, we will be able to issue a stop notice, which is equivalent to a prohibition notice, or a remedial action notice, which will sort of temporarily stop them trading until they have put that problem right. So it will have the effect of potentially protecting public health more vigorously and more widely. There's more revenue generating potential, and that will be an ongoing revenue generating potential. The problems that we have, there's a lot of lack of clarity at the moment of what premises and practitioners would be exempt. They're looking at anybody who is a registered medical practitioner who operates from an NHS or hospital setting would be exempt. And I think that that's in reality likely to apply to more of the acupuncture dry needling treatments. But it will cause some consternation from people operating out of private clinics, which are registered with Health Inspectorate Wales. At the moment, there's a bit of a desire to not include that cohort of people in the exempt category because of the variable standards that we're likely to see. So I know that there's going to be some massive pushback from industry on that, and that's probably what will come through with this first round of the consultation. We also know currently that there's been a lot of unrest about the higher fees, particularly from industry. I can understand that. We're going through a cost of living crisis, and it's significantly higher than what we currently charge for the registration scheme. However, it is an industry which does make a fair bit of money. It's a different ball game, say from food businesses, but it's certainly going to be uncomfortable because it's not something they're used to compared to what they currently have to pay. From a personal license and premises approval, with it being renewable every 3 years, whilst that'll be a more consistent revenue stream, it will have a greater burden on local authority officers who will then be required to revisit these places on a 3-year basis. We have expressed concern that sort of that massive glut of applications we're going to get as soon as the system goes live is going to be replicated every 3 years unless Welsh Government builds enough flex into that system so that we can disperse that demand a bit more evenly across the year. And undoubtedly, I have a team of, well, me plus 8. It's going to be a piece of work that's going to have to be done in addition to the existing communicable disease and health and safety enforcement work that we already do. So realistically, it's going to be challenging to be able to deliver the same level of work across all areas of what my team looks at to be able to successfully deliver the licensing scheme. As I've said, unfortunately, the transition period is yet to be determined, but we do know there's no grandfather rights. Now, the new 7-day licence for exhibitions and conventions and guest chairs, so that's where you may have somebody sort of visiting from England, Scotland, or even Europe to do a bit of a stint in a SRS-based practice, is a new thing. We do have concern that the turnaround time for that is going to be very tight. So Welsh Government is looking at making it a prerequisite that those applications would have to be in at least 2 months before that convention, guest chair or exhibit is due to take place. We are likely to have a few issues with non-UK based practitioners, particularly from a perspective of completion of the infection control training and even from a DBS perspective. I know this is something that is contained within other areas of licensing, and I think they can produce a certificate of good character. But again, it may be something that just is a complicating factor as opposed to the Welsh-based practitioners. So as I've said, new enforcement powers will enable the scratches to be dealt with more efficiently, more effectively, and that will save a massive amount of time dealing with enforcement matters and enable us to deal with the risks to public health more effectively. It is just hoped that the regulations are expanded relatively quickly to include those additional aesthetic treatments, because that is where we're starting to see the majority of the problems. Unfortunately, we haven't had a change implementation timeline from Welsh Government yet. It's something we've been pushing for and asking for about the last year. I don't know the reason why it's not being made available. We've asked again recently, so hopefully we'll get something from them just to give us that tool to work from so that we can start looking at the SRS implications in conjunction with that timeline. And as I've said, detail of what everything looks like is not currently available. So I do feel like I'm trying to sort of shape thin air at the moment to a certain extent, but hopefully it will all come together quite quickly after consultation phase 1 has been completed. So just to put some context for you, these are the numbers that we've got currently in SRS. So between the personal registrations and premises registrations, it's 243 for Bridgend, 469 for Cardiff and 176 for the Vale. So they're not insignificant numbers. And just to give you a flavour of how many we've had in recently, from 1st of January to the end of February, we had 27 new applications for registration. So, you know, it's not something that's slowing down anytime soon. It's a big area of business for the SRS region. Okay, so hopefully you found that of use. I'll stop sharing my screen, and if anybody's got any questions, then I'd be delighted to take.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was a very informative, and that was a sort of a lot to go through. I know I can see that Councillor Lewis has a question, but perhaps before I go to her, I mean, you've said a couple of times, really. Oh, I've got a bit of. Can you hear me? Because I've got some background noise.
Yeah.
So there isn't so as well as not having resources, there really isn't a sort of a time scale, really. So you've got to carry on, but somehow incorporate this framework. But there is actually no sort of time scale going forward for you. The
only thing that we know sort of for sure is the go live date has been tentatively moved to the 1st of April next year. How everything slots in place leading up to that deadline, we haven't got the nuts and bolts of that. It's very frustrating. It's something that we are constantly nagging for. My fear is that it's going to all be released at the very last end, and it's going to be a bit of a mad dash to get over the finish line. We will have a situation where we'll have potentially 2 pieces of legislation running in tandem with each other, because what we can't have is those premises already registered who suddenly have their registration removed because that act is repealed, and then they're hanging in abeyance until we actually manage to get round and do their licence visit. So there's going to have to be sort of 2 systems coexisting and rubbing along simultaneously for a certain period of time, and that is a little bit of an arm wrestling theme we have with them at the moment, because you know, we need that to be as flexible as possible, just because we know there's going to be an avalanche of visit requests very early on, come the 1st of April.
And sorry, and just my last question. So in terms of resources, because in terms of opportunities, we've got this the training opportunity, which will sit with you, which will obviously, but I mean, that comes on top of then the enforcement and the visits and so on. So I mean, in terms of resources, we're talking people, aren't we, in terms of visits and stuff? Okay.
Yeah, so it's bums on seats, unfortunately, and you know, it's not coming with any additional Welsh Government funding, which, as you can imagine, how that's gone down across all local authorities. I guess it's a piece of work that's going to have to be done, because if somebody's not licensed, they can't trade. So you can imagine, you know, the fallout from that if we can't get around to do the visit.
It's a good thing, isn't it? It's a good thing to tighten those things. Yes.
Yeah, but inevitably, it's a piece of work that has to be done within an existing pool of people, and it's just trying to figure out how best to prioritise everything else so that we can keep all balls being juggled, all spins being, all plates being spun, you know, to try and maintain the level of service as best as we can.
I mean, it would be really helpful for this committee if we have sort of an update from you, you know, in the next few months, in terms of, you know, sort of where we're going, and then obviously, you know, once it is all implemented next April, yes, another presentation would be really helpful. So thank you very much for that. I know, and Councillor Lewis has been waiting patiently. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah, that was really interesting. My concern is that there is no funding available. With all the budget cuts that councils have had to make, and there's so much uncertainty over all this, how are councils supposed to plan with no funding and all the uncertainty? You know, I don't understand how they're supposed to do it. I know, I mean, just for Bridgend, they've made so much cuts, there's nothing left.
I do wonder if Welsh Government think I've got a little Superman cape rolled up in my column most of the time, but yeah, it's something that is the biggest point of concern, and certainly the expert panels that I sit on, which would be the communicable disease and the health and safety one, that is one of the primary points being fed back as part of the consultation process, that we have, you know, genuine concerns that, you know, how are we expected to deliver this? And don't forget, as soon as they start introducing all the other aesthetic treatments as well, that's going to bring on board with it a hell of a lot more businesses that need to be included in it. So it would be interesting to see what Welsh Government comes back with after the end of consultation 1. But it will be a bit of a sit down to see how all of this is going to be managed in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, because I mean, at the moment, departments are at their very rock bottom with staff. You know, to try and put something like this on them is going to cause a breaking point.
Yeah, and I manage a team who have literally come out of 2 years of solid COVID, and then, you know, we've got this to look forward to down the line.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I do agree with the legislature. I do agree with what they're saying, but how can they force all this onto councils and just say get on with it with no extra funding? You know,
I completely agree. If you would like to do put consultation response in, please do. But yeah, it is of concern.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. Okay. Thanks. I will raise it somewhere.
No, if you could, that would be fantastic, because it's the funding issue, I think, because obviously we can't make a profit with all things licensing. You can set a fee to cover your costs, but you can't be seen to make a profit for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
I guess it may be just a case where we sit down and look at where we pitch our fees and whether that would enable us to get more bummers on seats. I don't know. That's something that we all need to get around a table and look at the bigger picture with.
Okay, thanks for that, Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I mean, it is something, as this committee, we can also perhaps write. Maybe Helen, you and I can have a conversation about that. But maybe we can write and raise that as an issue to the minister. But yes, thank you, Sarah.
No
and as
problem.
I say, thank you for your patience for waiting all these months to come on.
No problem.
So, Helen, I think we've got building safety, and that's are we going over to Will?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, Chair. So we'll pick up for us building safety, conscious of time.
Yeah.
And then straight after Will, Jason will come in and he will cover protecting the environment and safeguarding the vulnerable.
Perfect. Thank you. Will.
Thanks, Chair. So this will be brief. 2.15 is a very brief update for members on a number of policy programmes being developed by Welsh Government at the moment around building safety. I think the key takeaway message for members is that the Minister has reiterated a commitment that no leaseholders will be expected to bear the cost of remediation for buildings with fire safety issues, either related to cladding materials or compartmentation problems, which is where there's a compromise between flats due to a number of different reasons that could inhibit fire protection. To this end, they've signed up a tranche of developers to something called a Developers Pact, and also launched something called a Leaseholder Support Scheme, which is aimed at trying to ease the financial burden on those most affected by the current situation, if they're in buildings that are difficult to sell flats in. They're also developing plans to deal with so-called orphan sites, where no developer is currently responsible. So they have a number of policy programs actively being developed, which hopefully will bear fruit over the coming months. Finally, they will also be implementing plans to review the regulation of fire safety in all mixed-use and multi-occupied residential buildings. So it's quite a change, and it'll include changes to the way HMOs, for instance, which local authorities mostly regulate, are dealt with. So SRS are represented on something called the Strategic Stakeholder Group, as well as membership of bodies such as the expert panels who Welsh Government are liaising with. And as some of these policy programmes come to fruition, we'll be able to update members as the work progresses.
Thanks, Will. So is there a time scale on sort of actual implementation then?
Well, we obviously had the white paper in 2021, I believe, and at the moment they're still, I think it's fair to say, trying to catalogue the extent of the issue of the problem. They've done a lot of intrusive surveys. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, and the Strategic Stakeholder Group has representatives from a vast range of groups who have an interest in this. So I think there is momentum behind the programme, but when that will come to fruition, I wouldn't be able to say yet.
And just a quick question. Do you know? So on the developers, is that a voluntary signing up for? Well, and who hasn't signed up for it? That's what I'd like to know.
Well, I don't know who hasn't. I know that they had written to 51 developers. 36 of those had confirmed they had no medium or high risk buildings in Wales, and 2 had confirmed they'd already taken steps to address fire safety risks in Wales. There are 11 developers who signed up to the Welsh Government's Developers Pact, which is basically a public commitment that they will rectify fire safety issues in buildings 11 metres and over which they have developed is in the last 30 years. And, you know, some of the major players are there, Persimmon, you know, Wimpey, Bill Taylor, Wimpey, Rama Level. So some of the big developers that people will be aware of. The pact itself isn't legally binding, I understand. And I guess the position of the Welsh Government is that they maintain the position that they will explore all options, including legislation, to ensure that developers take their part in remedying the problem. So I think it's hoped that it'll be done through cooperation, but you know, potentially that may, if that doesn't work, there are other options Welsh Government can look to explore.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Will.
Okay.
Do any other councillors have any questions? Councillor Drake.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, with regards to the fire safety, are you working in conjunction with the South Wales Fire?
Pam, I think you have to come on screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. I thought I pressed it. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
With regards to the fire safety, are you working in conjunction with the South Wales Fire and Rescue Service as well?
Yes, I mean, locally we work closely anyway with South Wales Fire and Rescue Service, and throughout the sort of remit of the building safety programme, South Wales Fire and Rescue are heavily represented, and actually the chair of the strategic stakeholder group is an ex-fire chief. So yeah, they're front and centre in this, as you would expect with high-rise buildings, given their expertise.
Thank you for that. I'll turn my camera off now.
Okay, thanks, Will.
Okay.
So if there aren't other questions, it's over to you, Jason.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Thanks for that. Morning, everyone. So from 2.6 through to 2.21, we've given an update on the air quality progress reports that have been presented to each of the individual cabinets for each of the authorities, really. So just going through that Bridgend air quality progress report. So this is a statutory report we have to produce. It demonstrated, apart from the Park Street air quality management area in Bridgend, air quality compliance was achieved throughout the rest of Bridgend. But we're also given an update that from August through to the 21st of November, we did a public consultation on the draft air quality action plan for the Park Street air quality management area. And really, it was quite a useful exercise. We had a number of respondents and people attending drop-in sessions on that. And the results of the consultation were overall positive to the measures being looked at the air quality action plan. So we've taken the draft air quality plan, we're further reviewing it based on some technical feedback from Welsh Government, with a view that we'll take a final plan to Bridgend Cabinet shortly. The Cardiff Air Quality Action Plan annual progress report, showed that no monitoring sites in 2021 recorded exceedances of the NO2 standard for 40 micrograms per meter cubed as an annual average in that. So I think this still shows that the results are indicative of the continued impacts from COVID in 2021, as there was some initial lockdown measures at the start of the year, really. And the shared regulatory services were still continuing to support Cardiff on the delivery of their clean air plan, where some additional work has been undertaken as requested by Welsh Government to model some potential permanent schemes for the Castle Street issue there, and looking for a further reporting decision likely to the end of Q4 or into Q1 of 23-24. And the Vale Glamorgan report demonstrated that all areas monitored in the Vale Glamorgan achieved the NO2 compliance of 40 micrograms, and the continued monitoring within the previous air quality management area near Windsor Road showed continued compliance for the annual objective for NO2, really. And quite a useful sort of update on the air quality for the three authorities today, as the Minister today has announced the introduction of the new Environment Bill, which includes air quality. So that's looking how Welsh Government is going to bring their commitments to further improve air quality and introduce new national targets through the programme of work there, really. So if there's any questions, those happy to take those on the air quality aspects there. If not, I can move on to the safeguarding the vulnerable section.
I think you can carry on, Jason.
Good. Okay. So we had a really exciting period in quarter three, where the Wales Illegal Money Lending Unit, we went through a full rebrand of the unit, and is now sort of the business side of it is now known as Stop Loan Shark Wales. So as part of this campaign to relaunch the unit, we did some really local targeted action campaigns undertaken in Wrexham and Neath Port, which was based on more recent intelligence of some illegal lending happening in those areas. And so we put some digivans out on the roads advertising some key messages about this, Stop Loan Shark Wales, and the vulnerability that people may be faced in terms of being targeted by loan sharks and illegal money activity, really. So in 2.25, the report, we're just reiterating the communications of how to get in touch with Stop Loan Shark Wales, with the telephone number of 0300 123 3311, and the website, email address, sorry, of Stop Loan Shark Wales at valeligmorgan.gov.uk. As part of the relaunch and the rebranding, we supported this campaign with a really in-depth research project looking at illegal money lending activity across Wales. And probably the biggest bit of research that's ever been undertaken into lending activities across Wales. And really the main finding of the research confirmed our concerns and fears that we've expressed recently, is that the cost of living crisis is having undoubtedly financial hardships across people, and potentially driving people to borrowing from illegal money lenders, really. So we've put in 2.27 just some key sort of headline stats from the research, which was based on 1,000 respondents through telephone and online surveys, really. So 50% of the people surveyed had actually considered borrowing money in 2022 just to cover everyday essentials from food and basic toiletries. Respondents who had actually borrowed money in the last 12 months, 50% of them had indicated they'd borrowed funds just to cover everyday living expenses. Over 2/3 had borrowed money for food. And over 50%, 53% actually indicated they borrowed additional funds just to cover the energy bills, really. So we can really see the impacts the cost of living crisis is having on the communities out there, and people who are struggling to make ends meet and looking for easy ways to try and lend money, and unfortunately turning to illegal money lenders, really. A key aspect of the research also shows that people aged between 18 and 34 potentially are going to be more susceptible to illegal money lenders. So again, it's sort of indicating where we need to be targeting our resources and sort of communicating out there. Survey also revealed some hotspots where we feel, again, targeted action may be undertaken in terms of Merthyr Tydfil, Caerphilly and Swansea, sort of high proportion of residents aware of potential illegal lending that is undertaken in their area, really. So the information has been really useful for the unit, and that's going to help us target our actions for the forthcoming year, really try to identify illegal lenders and take action against them to protect any victims becoming susceptible to illegal lenders, really, just given the detriment that they do cause and the hardship caused to anyone who is becomes a victim of illegal lenders, really. So happy to take any questions on the unit and.
Thank you, Jason. That survey is actually really interesting, and actually, I think highlights what we've known for a long time, really, isn't it? The sort of the unregulation, the fact that things aren't regulated properly enough and enforced enough, means that people do fall victim to loan sharks. Are there any specific questions for Jason? Do any councillors have any? That was perfect then, Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's back over to Helen now.
Yeah, back to you, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly, I wanted to highlight the Trading Standards Impacts and Outcomes report for Wales, which has been published. So from 2.32, it discusses exactly what the impacts and outcomes framework is all about, and the fact that it pulls data from across Wales. So it's a really powerful tool to illustrate the worth of trade and standard services across Wales. So I'm not going to dwell on the headlines for that. It's all in Appendix 2. It's a full report and a really useful infographic, which makes really interesting reading. But I have taken the opportunity to show the contribution of SRS to those overall Wales statistics. And I think it's really interesting to note that our combined population across the 3 local authority areas is the equivalent of about a fifth or 20% of the population of Wales. But if you look at the detail of what I've set out in 2.33, you'll see that we're really punching above our weight in terms of the length of prison sentences across Wales, the proportion of that that is down to SRS cases, 27%. SRS cases led to the conviction of 18% of the defendants convicted in trade and standards cases across Wales, so thereabouts 20%, but then 33% was our contribution to the fines imposed, and our contribution to all costs imposed by the courts. Our cases accounted for 74% of those, so really punching above our weight, and you know, a great success story. And I'd really recommend, if you have opportunity to read the report or just the infographic, it is worth it. It's quite powerful statistics. And then moving quickly on to 2.34, Chair. This is what we usually do at this point, is to highlight the prosecution cases which have most recently concluded in court. So this is up to the end of February. And you'll see again there's a breadth of different cases there. I'm not going to go into detail right now, but if anyone has any queries on any of these, would like further information, then I can provide that. But I would just draw attention to the case highlighted at number 5 and the level of fine there. So that's a private sector housing case with a fine of over £23,000, and the fact that we've got a couple of rogue builder or doorstep crime cases with custodial sentences, one of 12 months and the other of 9 months for each of the 2 defendants. So again, some really good reading there on our recent court cases that have concluded. And I can pause there for any questions, Chair. Don't say
that is brilliant, and you know, well done to the team, Helen, because that really is brilliant. I have a quick question. So in terms when these fines are imposed, and I'm assuming also our costs, do we generally get our money? Do they generally, or are they all claiming bankruptcy and not paying us anything?
So the fines that are imposed by the courts, we don't get to see the fines.
No, that's right.
They obviously go into the into the system. Costs, sometimes we see costs, but there will be calculations, as you know. Financial circumstances of defendants will be taken into account. If it's a custodial sentence, then they won't. Very often, the compensation for victims is more important for us. And sometimes we're able to progress that through proceeds of crime avenue as well, so that it is possible to get compensation for victims. Not all of the time, unfortunately, but we do our very best there.
Brilliant, thank you. Are there any questions from anyone else? No, Helen?
Lovely. So that concludes the overview and update report, Chair, with a recommendation for a joint committee to consider, note and agree the contents of the report.
Thank you, Helen. Can someone put the recommendation forward, please?
I'll move, Chair.
I'll second.
Thank you. So thank you, Helen and team, for that. So we're now moving to the revenue monitoring report, and is Hannah here? I think Hannah's taking that. Is that right? Gemma, I mean, sorry.
No, don't worry. That's okay. Hi. So I'll just take you through the revenue monitoring to the end of Q3. Obviously, we're starting to substantially through the financial year now, so it starts to give you a good idea of where we expect to end up. So the budget for 22-23 was 8.331 million, and that was agreed back in December 2021. But as you'll recall from previous monitoring reports, that assumed a 2% pay award, and obviously the position where we ended up in 22-23 is substantially different. So the agreed pay award was accepted late in 2022, and that exceeded the budget by approximately 268,000. But what we found as we progressed through the year, and I think you'll have picked that up through the kind of performance report that we've been hearing as well, that's been partially offset by vacancies. So in terms of the Q3 projected outturn, we are forecasting an overspend, coincidentally, of 268,000, although this is unrelated to the pay award costs, and that's illustrated within the executive summary and also at point 2.1 of the report, and that's predominantly related to the authority specific services, which is set out in point 2.6 of the report. So we're currently forecasting an overspend in this sector of 258,000, and the majority of that is driven by a historic Cardiff authority specific budget shortfall of 200,000 within taxi licensing. We do also have a small overspend against licenses for the Vale as well. In terms of core services, which are illustrated at point 2.16 of the report, we're forecasting an aggregate overspend of 10,000. There is a £13,000 forecast Cardiff overspend, and that relates to Cardiff specific activity. And actually, since this report's been put together, we have agreed a resolution to that adverse variance with Cardiff, and that relates to works in default, which will be billed for separately at year end. Now, where we've got an overspend relating to authority specific services, we do charge directly for those costs, but where we have any aggregate overspend at year end, then we would look in the first instance at the SRS reserve before going back to the partner authorities for additional contributions. So those are the main points that I was going to draw out from the report, but I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you, Gemma. Are there any specific questions for Gemma on the report? No? Brilliant.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that leads us to agenda item 6, which is the appointment of proper officers. And Helen, this is an administrative issue, isn't it? So can you just take us through that?
That's right, Chair. I'm actually, it'd be Christina to take us through this.
Sorry, Christina. I apologise.
That's okay, no problem. Yes, a very quick report, this one. It is an administrative exercise, but to give you a little bit of context around what it is that you're signing off. The proper officer report then is the Public Health Control of Disease Act 1984 and the associated regulations empower proper officers to carry out various functions and duties. And the Health Protection Authority is us as a local authority, and we authorise consultants of Public Health Wales to undertake specific duties contained in the legislation on our behalf. The responsibility to ensure that the provisions of the legislation in accordance with the Communicable Disease Outbreak Plan for Wales lies with us as local authority. And again, the role of the proper officer and the port medical officer is to support us as local authority to discharge our legal duties, specifically in managing communicable disease control. So the report in front of you comes from a request from Public Health Wales, which is for us in terms of our 3 councils to update the existing list of proper officer and port medical officer. It's currently way out of date. And as such, the recommendation for you as Joint Committee is to authorise the individuals named in the report. You'll see that they're all listed to act as our proper officer and port medical officer for the purposes of the legislation. So again, very much administrative task, but to provide some context there as to the rationale behind it.
Thank you, Christina. And something that we should have done with our the the revenue monitoring report, was the recommendation for that was just to note. So can I take it that we're committee is happy to note the revenue monitoring report, agenda item 5, and then for this report, Christina, the recommendation is for us to authorise it. So can I take a committee that we're happy to do that? I think that's a yes. So we're happy to authorise that.
Can I ask one question?
You certainly can.
Regarding our officers, when they're taking on these roles, do they encounter much abuse? And what protection do they have or can call on?
Helmets.
In terms of our sort of roles of our officers, we've got specific lead officers for communicable disease control, one for each local authority. And the way that this works is that we work with our partners as a sort of multi-agency approach to make sure that we get things sort of under control and to sort of protect the community as best we can. There is specific legislation in terms of Part 2A orders and obtaining orders from the court. Obviously, some people are not happy with the outcome, but generally officers deal with that very, very well. And we've got obviously some health and safety and safeguarding measures in place. So we always encounter some unsavoury individuals, but nothing, nothing of serious concern to us in any case. The officers are very well trained in dealing with these sort of more difficult situations.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that. I was just concerned about their safety because there's some very awkward people out there at the moment. And that. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam, and thank you, Christina. So we're happy to authorise that. So we now move to item 7 on the agenda. Any items which the chair's decided are urgent under part 1, and I don't have any. And there are no items under part 2. So all that's left for me is to thank you all for coming this morning, and to thank the officers in particular, and to thank Helen. So enjoy the rest of your day, people.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.